And joining us now, University of Maryland economist Peter Morici. And Peter, thanks for joining us this morning. We had earlier in the week, we had a UCLA economic report come out that said jobs aren't growing rapidly enough. In fact, the author said this isn't a recovery. It's not even normal growth. This is bad. And then you had President Obama yesterday in North Carolina talking to a middle school saying that things are looking good. He's committed to getting good middle-class jobs. Later today, we'll have a jobs report. What is the status of jobs in America?
Well, it's someplace in between. I mean, it's no surprise UCLA is more conservative than me, if that's possible.
Wow.
Yeah, they really are. That's sort of the West Coast University of Chicago. They're very fine, by the way, at what they do. So I'm not surprised. And Mr. Obama is going to try to paint a good face on what is a lousy recovery. The most important number to focus on is 5% 45 months into the Reagan recovery, 2% 45 months into the Obama recovery. In there lies the whole difference. That's why jobs growth is so tepid. And think about this. Just think about the millions of young people who are leaving school who can't find a decent job. I mean, it's not just finding a job. It's finding a decent job that gets you started in life.
But the Obama administration will continue to claim that, Reagan's numbers looked good, but he didn't have it nearly as bad as we did when we inherited the worst economy since Franklin Roosevelt.
Well, the facts don't belie that. I mean, for Mr. Reagan, we had, the tripling of oil prices, double-digit interest rates, double-digit unemployment. Unemployment peaked at 10.8% for Mr. Reagan. It only peaked at 10% for Mr. Obama. The problems were different, but to say his problems are bigger, they're worse. Haven't you noticed? Obama blames somebody for everything. The guy has the best alibi in town. That's all it comes down to. The economy is just not performing as it should. And I just love it when I go over to liberal, more progressive networks. They'll say, well, gee, we're doing better than the Europeans. That's like saying the Yankees can beat the Toledo Mud Hens.
All right, so let's talk about the Dow for a minute, because the Dow this week dipped below 15,000 and then bounced back a little bit yesterday. But as I understand it, and help me understand it, because I think this is sort of fascinating, it's like because the economy is starting to do slightly better, that's bad news for the Dow. Explain that.
Well, the Dow is driven by the profitability of firms, so doing better is good. But it's also driven down by higher interest rates, because then bonds become an attractive alternative to people like Procter & Gamble, which are dividend-yielding stocks, and there are a lot of those out there. And as the economy does better, the Fed's going to pull back, and interest rates will rise, and that's already started to happen. And that is starting to take a little bit of the juice, or the little bit of the rum, out of Wall Street's punch bowl. To some degree, this rally has been fed by, all the Fed printing all that money and keeping interest rates very, very low. Well, that can't continue indefinitely.
So what would you say looking forward for the Dow? I mean, are we going to be in a little bit of a slump? And is that ultimately a thing that we're just going to have to go through?
So you want me to pick the winner of the Super
No, I'm not. I'm just I'm asking what you think the general trends are going to be.
That unless the Fed continues its quantitative easing, into the fall and announces that it's going to do that, concerns about its policies and the fact that the growth in profits has slowed down mean that we're sort of getting to a peak, and we may get a little bit of growth, but we're not going to have the kind of rocketing performance we had in the first 4.5 months of the year. We're just not.
Peter Morici from the University of Maryland. You're sitting there on a college campus on a daily basis, trying to mold these skulls full of mush into the next generation of Peter Morici.
Children from liberals.
Well, one of the hot topics right now has to do with the student loan issue in front of the Senate right now. And can you help us wade through this and explain to me what's going on here? Because it seems like there's this ticking time bomb, and if the Senate doesn't do something about it, suddenly everybody's student loan rates are going to almost double. Why are student loan rates not linked to market principles, so that the student loan rate is going to move as just like the rest of us who have to borrow money? Our rates are based on what the market will bear. Why do we have this government intrusion? Why do we have this political discussion on an annual basis?
Wow, you're asking a lot of questions. The thing about student loans is they are much more speculative in their nature. When someone gets a mortgage, they have income. Here we're loaning people money not to build a factory, but to get an education that may get them an income. And I think the expectation was the job market would be a lot better by now, and that students would be able to pay a somewhat higher interest rates. If the market really determined what students should pay, interest rates would be lower for people that go to Harvard, lower for people that go to engineering colleges, and very high for working class kids. A kid like myself, coming out of a working class neighborhood in New York City, went to Plattsburgh State. I mean, the odds of me becoming what I did out of Plattsburgh State were pretty low. Okay? And so it's kind of like betting on the education of a kid who's going to be a basketball player, and he goes to Alcorn State as opposed to UCLA, where he'll also learn to think right. The problem with student loans, if you make them market-based, then a lot of working-class kids are going to pay very, very high rates, become discouraged, and not go to college at all. By the way, that is starting to happen. Secretary Bennett, in his new book, points out that many fewer working-class kids are going to college than 30 years ago, simply because the generosity of student loans, the government taking it to the other extreme, has driven up the price of an education. And if you can find someone more irresponsible than a university president, you call me up. I think, people say we look to the governors. We look to the governors to find our presidents. Wrong. We should look to our university presidents. After all, look at how much Barack Obama is loved, and look at how irresponsibly he behaves. So what better place to find in fact, if the country would take mine off my hands, I'd feel good about it.
Is there something you'd like to say about Mr. Wallace Lowe, president of University of Maryland?
No, he's as good as he's like all the others. I'm not going to get into. I want to keep my job.
Right.
Although I have to admit, I painted myself into this cul-de-sac.
All right, so we got about a minute left. I want to ask you about this IRS. We're going to get into this in just a moment in greater detail, but this IRS hearing yesterday that looked at some $50 million in spending for conferences. Any thoughts on that?
Do you remember the arrogant aristocrats that caused the French Revolution? All I can say is the folks that work in the IRS are particularly lucky right now, given they have offices sprinkled around the country to harass people, that Americans don't have ready access to pitchforks anymore.
So Lois Lerner is Marie
There would be
Antoinette.
these guys in rags outside their doors screaming and yelling for justice. I mean, the IRS are just a bunch of arrogant people. It's wholly irresponsible to spend that kind of government money at times like these. But it just goes to show you how tone deaf they are, and it's time to shut the place down. There's really only one. I'm going to leave you with this thought. There's really only one answer to the IRS: plywood and nails, and send the bureaucrats home.
All right.
Go up
Amen,
the
Peter
windows
Morici.
and send the bureaucrats home.
Not pulling his punches today, Peter Morici. Always good to have
Can
you.
you employ me next week after President
Yeah, exactly.
Take care.
That's the headline. Peter Morici hates the presidents of all universities. And he's a university